All right. Thank you very much, Abba, and to our speakers today, Marina and Dr. Charles Adeyemi from Nigeria, Marina from the UK. It's a pleasure having you guys here today to join the conversation. And as you're all aware, this is a very important webinar for Liberty International Africa. So while we are waiting for other of our team members to join us, the speakers, thank you for coming. I would like to give a very short time for introduction, starting with Dr. Charles from Nigeria. Dr. Charles, it's been a long time and happy to see you. Please, do you mind to introduce yourself to us this afternoon? Thank you. Dr. Charles, are you there? Hello, Dr. Charles.
Very much here. Good afternoon.
Oh.
Good afternoon, Roland. Mr. Dapper, as I call him.
Good afternoon.
Marina and Alba, and everyone who's joined us on the call. Good afternoon to you all from Lagos, Nigeria. I think it's just a few minutes past 3 p.m. My full name is Chale Charles Adeyemi. I'm the founder of Chale Institute. I'm a free market enthusiast. I'm the instructor of the African Ideas of Liberty course on Udemy, where I try to teach the African ideas of liberty, basically, as the title goes. I'm actually a lecturer in a Nigerian university, Osun State University. I used to be academic director of African Students for Liberty, and so on and so forth. And I'm very happy to be with you to share ideas, exchange ideas, and learn from the other discussants on this call on a very important topic to, Africans generally. Thank you very much to Liberty International and ILEE in Ghana for putting this together and for inviting me.
All right, thank you, Dr. Adeyemi. Thank you so much. Quickly want to also take an introductory opening from Marina. Marina is an old friend from the UK. Marina, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Marina, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. You faded a little
All
bit,
right.
But I'm still here.
Okay.
You can hear me all right?
Well, yeah, very well. I can.
Okay. Would you like me to introduce myself then?
Definitely. Go ahead, please.
All right, then. Thank you very much for inviting me here. As you suggested, we're friends from way back because it's for a number of years now, I have been doing talks for Roland's group called Rock Me, which is Rewards of Capitalism, Knowledge and Empowerment, which is a wonderful name for a movement that endeavors to spread liberty amongst young people particularly. This is my forte. I used to teach history in an English grammar school for over 20 years before I retired. That was a second career after computing. Now I teach intermittently at casual liberty camps around the world because my great passion is spreading free market ideas, obviously young people and traveling, and there's no better way of combining these interests. I'm particularly interested in African development since I did a master's degree later in life with the great Professor James Tooley, who is the champion of private education in around the world in developing countries, but particularly in Africa and Nigeria. You may know he works with the Association for Formidable Educational Development, which is an association of several thousand private schools, and there are many, many thousands across Nigeria because they understand that a small private school is far better for children's education than the large state schools that are quite ineffective. Yes, so I think it's vitally important that Africa develops. It's the world's, a flourishing population. The world will be African, 25% African by the end of this century. If they don't develop, then the rest of the world is going to pay the price. It's important. It's a humanitarian imperative for Africans to develop. And of course, we want to see you enjoy all the high standards of living that other people do. You deserve it along with everybody else. So yes, African development is paramount. And we know that you're going to have to do it yourself. There's no other way, certainly not foreign aid. I'm spending too much time introducing. I'll stop there and talk more later.
Thank you, Marina. That's a very brief and concise introduction. It's amazing.
I'm losing you, Roland.
Roland, your voice is crackling.
Now you're frozen.
Yeah, Coffie.
You could hear me all right, could you, Charles?
Yes, I can hear you. But
good, Roland... and you heard me. It's just Roland, is it, that where the connection is poor?
Roland, if you can hear us, maybe you need to switch your network. Maybe you need to switch your network to another provider or something. Maybe I should. Do you want me to start?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So, okay, looks like Roland just left. I actually sent some slides to Roland. I wasn't sure if we're going to use slides, but it looks like we may not need to, as it's very limited time. So before we started the call, I overheard Marina and Halba, and there was a part of the conversation where you guys were talking about the negative side of the conversation, and then dwelling more on the positive light. And that's essentially my approach and my attitude to this, because it can be a very gloomy subject for an African to talk about, especially on the global stage, very sensitive, because the pride of any African, it may potentially be hurt if it's not well handled. However, it's important to have the difficult conversations, because when you do not have the difficult conversations, then you do not give yourself enough, opportunity to face the problems and to solve them and to grow and do better. So, but then this is not necessarily a dark or gloomy subject. It can be a very bright one. And on that note, I'd like to talk first of all about a bit of introductory remarks and context. So we are in Africa here. I am currently in Lagos, and a continent that is very rich in resources, both natural and human resources. Africa, by several studies, have shown that Africa has by far the most is by far the most resource-rich continent in the world. Some even say that Africa has up to 30% of the critical mineral resources in the world. For instance, you look at something like chromium. South Africa alone, is responsible for 45% of chromium deposits in the world. Something like cobalt, you have Congo coming in with 67% of global production. Manganese, you have Africa doing up to 50% of that. Diamonds, Africa is doing like 43%. uranium, Africa is doing about 25%. And we can go on and on. Africa is very resource rich. Okay, now let's look at the human population side. Of course, Africa is not the most populated continent, obviously. However, Africa has the youngest population. You know, Africa, in fact, there is anyone who is interested in the subject can go online and try and do a little digging. But, you know, there is a popular graph that shows the pattern of growth of populations in the various continents around the world today. And you find that Asia, which is the big population behemoth, where you have China, you know, with 1.7 billion. Asia, you know, is declining in population. Europe, Latin America, North America, they kind of all declining. But Africa is on the rise. The population of Africa is burgeoning. It's just a massive explosive growth. And locked in this growth of African population, obviously, is the potential for, you know, development. Recent news from Japan, there's some serious, you know, economic challenges coming up in Japan, which, you know, essentially boils down to the decline in Japanese population. They are the world's oldest population. They have, I think, around 30% of their population being over 65 years of age. So that's not very good for their economy. So now Africa has all these advantages that I've just enumerated, and yet, in spite of this, several African countries have, you know, remained quite dependent on aid, foreign aid, as it were. And this has posed significant challenges for the development of the continent, because people are distracted from looking inwards in terms of national governments, are not looking inwards enough because they can always run to get aid from elsewhere and so on. But this is something, that's a narrative that Africa needs to change, that young Africans especially need to be very upfront about changing. And that is why we are having this call. And so I like to talk about African proverbs and adages and idioms, because this is a rich continent, rich in culture, rich in tradition. And the first thing I'd like to point out, which is the style that I use for my courses and my lectures and teachings, is if you look into the tradition and the history of Africa, you'll find that we have our ancestors left us with what you can call guidance on things like aid. And what we were left, there is a saying in Yoruba, and you know, Africa, there is so many different cultures and tribes. And so I am Yoruba from Nigeria. And there's a saying in the Yoruba language and tradition, a proverb that loke loke lowo afuni ngbe. Translated to English, it simply means that the giver will always have the upper hand. Brilliant, you know, adage, it has insight. And of course, we have similar sayings across all cultures around the world outside of Africa. So nothing unique, it's all universal knowledge and, you know, insight and concepts. But what's the implication of this? One, what immediately comes to the mind of everyone is the idea that it is good to give to other people. And, you know, when you give, you're blessed, you know. But then there is the other side of that conversation, which is that you probably don't want to be the person to whom others are always giving. You know, you probably want to have more of a balance where your relationship with the other person is more equal, or perhaps you want to be the one giving, you know, to the other person. But the bottom line is that I'm trying to show that the idea of dependency on aid is not exactly innate in Africa. It's not an idea that our ancestors would approve of, for example, because they would rather have us being the one giving to others. And so I think we need to dig deep as Africans and reconnect with such ancestral wisdom and launch from there as we try to look beyond aid and reform in a way that we are able to, you know, get past this phase in our continental development where we are seen as the continent and countries that's somewhat aid dependent. So what do we need to do in terms of innovative strategies because I was told to focus on innovative strategies actually to get beyond aid dependency. Essentially, I summarized it into two. And the two things that we need to do to break free is to, cultivate our human and natural resources, to mobilize our human and natural resources. As I have demonstrated on this call already, we have the advantage globally when we are talking about natural resources. Also, we have the advantage globally when we are talking about human resources, because the 10 youngest populations in the world are all in Africa, the 10 youngest population. And, we're talking about Uganda, Niger, Chad, Angola, Mali, and so on. They have the youngest population in the world. While so many countries in Asia and Europe are aging, Africa, the population is dominated by young people. And if we are able to organize better and, mobilize this human capital by investing massively in them, we will be able to, stop aid dependency, and we will rather be the continent that supports other people. So going to the specific things that we need to do because of time, I know so many other persons have to speak. I've talked about, strengthening our resource mobilization, both human and natural resource, human capital and natural resource mobilization. We need to, we need to foster comprehensive economic diversification and value addition, and to prioritize strategic infrastructure development, and cultivating strategic global partnerships, which is like what we are doing on this call right now. For you to develop your human capital, you need some level of global partnerships, and even in exploiting your natural resources, also some level of global partnership, especially when we talk about trade, which is very critical, especially now we have the global supply chain is having some kind of turnaround with various real alliances that is going on with Trump, with America and the Middle East and all of that. And it's a very critical period in world history where Africa has a unique opportunity to, key into the new global supply chain as it's evolving. But that will require substantial human capital development, investment in the young population, primary school, secondary education, university, vocational skills training, and especially giving young people, the orientation towards trade, free trade, to understand that, again, as African adages, Yoruba adages will say, the path to wealth is through trade, so we need to do more of trade. We need to liberalize our economies. We need to have less barriers to trade. We need to have more economic integration within Africa itself. We need more freedom to trade across the African borders, which the African Union is actually working on through the free trade agreements and so on and so forth. So these are some of the things that I think we need to work on, and maybe we would elaborate more on them as the call goes on. So I believe Roland is back, and maybe Eric also.
Yeah, and thank you. Thank you, Charles, for your insights. I would like to jump now to Eric Coffie, who just joined. Would you like to please present yourself, talk a little bit about your work, and what are the keys of this topic in your perspective?
We can't hear you.
All right. Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon from Ghana. Yeah, so my name is Eric Coffie, and I'm the founder of the free market think tank, Institute for Liberty and Economic Education. And I'm an advocate for libertarian ideas. I support the free market system, and I believe freedom is the only solution to all Africa challenges and our economic hardships. So through my think tank, you'll be able to organize a lot of events to promote these ideas of freedom and liberty to most students and to young professionals and to policymakers, so that gradually, the ideas of liberty will gain roots in the African culture. The idea of liberty seems to something, should I say, alien to African culture, but from our history, you can see that liberty is not alien to Africa. It's something embedded in our culture. And just that our modern politicians are very greedy, and they are always pursuing their self-interest, and they impose this on the citizens by telling them that is the national interest. So I think the only way out is education. So educating the youth especially, because they are the future leaders, and imparting them with these ideas of liberty will ensure Africa will be free and be a prosperous continent in the future. So that's actually what I do with my think tank, ILEE.
Thank you, Eric. And taking into account what Charles was just saying about the amount of resources the continent has, and you just mentioned corruption, I mean, what do you think could be the solution? You know, then again, the title of this webinar is Beyond Aid Dependency. Or what, Marina, what do you think about this?
Yes, I'd like to first thank Eric for his introduction, and Charles especially in your emphasis on the importance of trade. I want to mention the African Continental Free Trade Area, which has already been introduced since 2021 and been ratified by 54 out of your 55 countries. But unfortunately, it's not yet been fully implemented. And this is something that Nigeria in particular could focus on, because you're the largest sub-Saharan African nation. And if you could set the example to implement the free trade area, that will go a long way towards developing your respective nations. It's, you know, they say that the World Bank says that if you did have a complete free trade area, you could lift, the GDP would be increased by $450 billion, that 30 million people can be lifted out of extreme poverty, and another 68 million out of moderate poverty. It would have an enormous impact. But before you trade, you have to have products to trade. And one of the most important developments that needs to be focused on also is implementation of property rights. And in a pre-industrial society, that means land rights. So it's vitally important that land rights be recognized, so that people have an incentive to produce, to grow, knowing that, you know, they will have the benefits of being able to keep and profit from the things that they make on their own land and their own properties. So land and property rights first, then trade. Okay, well, I'll leave it at that, and perhaps you can develop more points later.
Yeah, Charles, what do you think about this importance of the rights? I mean, how do you see it in Africa?
Oh yes, like Marina rightly pointed out, you need to have rights to land, to property, before you can, you know, cultivate for agriculture, for example. Land is very crucial for agriculture, and that is one of the core areas where Africa generally has a lot of strength, and also the mineral resources are also in the land. And now that's a more tricky one because the countries typically, like in Nigeria, the government, as you know, the way the land rights work in Nigeria, mineral-rich land belongs to the government. So, and that in itself is goes to part of the conversation around the freedom of the people to mobilize the natural resources. Because like I said in my introductory speech, the pathway away from aid dependency and for African prosperity will go through mobilization of natural resources on one hand and human resources on the other hand, which is also human capital development. And what you want to do with human capital development is to, educate your population in such a way that they are able to take advantage of the natural resources. They are able to, add value to the natural resources and produce and, products from there, which can be sold to the rest of the world. So, but then when you now have a policy environment that is not, friendly to ownership of land for the people, then there's a bottleneck, and that will need to be looked into and reviewed. And that's where a lot of libertarian think tanks come in to advocate for more freedom with regards to land rights and ease of doing business and so on. So yeah, very, very important, the issues of having the right policy framework to support ownership of property in order to help unleash individual prosperity.
So you two are talking about, this property rights is the fundamental basis to being able, of course, to own the product of your own work. And how can we empower people to fight for this, to try to be an entrepreneur in Africa and bring prosperity to the country? To countries, actually.
I mean, it all starts from education. Essentially, it's a lot of this comes down to mindset, orientation, but broadly, all of that are filed under education. Awareness, information, it's not so very uniform. People are not informed about so many opportunities that are available to them. And sometimes they are also not very aware of some of the policies of government that are holding them back, which is almost counterintuitive because typically you have people who, first of all, in Nigeria, for example, we have a very large population of, we have a high illiteracy rate. Our literacy is around, I think, just about 50%. So too many people do not have access to anything that is written down because they simply cannot read it. So when you have that kind of population, the conversation about policy is a bit out of their reach, unless somebody else translates and explains and so on and so forth, which is what think tanks can also do. But it just shows that there's just a whole lot of work in the education sector to get people educated to be able to read and write in the first place. And then when they are literate, to now say, now you're literate, but now there is this thing called economic policy. There's this set of policies that government make, and this is how those policies affect you. Because many people who are literate in Nigeria, and some of them highly educated, are not necessarily aware of economic policies and how those policies affect them. So it's just essentially the work of think tanks to do advocacy and to create awareness, sensitization, get more people to know about these issues that affects them. The other side of the story, beyond the macroeconomic side of it, on the micro level, is at least for those who are already aware and educated, to just give them the orientation, because again, when people are educated, that means, especially when they have maybe a degree, they've studied in a very diverse array of fields, and of course, it's up to them. It's a personal choice, which has to be respected, to be a professional in one narrow field, and like those of us in academics, or to explore trade. Now, I think it just boils down to orientation. In a country like Nigeria, there's something called National Orientation Agency, whose work is actually to give people the kind of orientation that the country prioritizes. But then again, we know that government is not usually the best in doing so many of these kinds of things. So again, it goes back to think tanks to give people more orientation towards trade, and also to assist the existing traders, because there are traders already in the system who, again, a lot of the traders may be illiterate, therefore they don't even know what economic policies are about. And some of the traders who are not illiterate simply haven't really paid attention to economic policy issues. So there is room for quite a lot of awareness creation and sensitization in such spaces to help people understand better how the policies of government affect them, to even take advantage of policies that have already been enacted and that are actually beneficial for them, which somehow they are oblivious of. And again, implementation of policies is problematic in Nigeria, in Africa. And one of the reasons why implementation are problematic, beyond the corruption is part of it, but then also the lack of awareness, constitutes a problem for implementation of policies, because the citizens are supposed to, have some kind of like checkmate, the government, respective government agencies. But when the citizens are not even aware of the policies, it's like when you don't know your right, that's what it just looks like. And so a corrupt government official can get away with anything. And sometimes some of the officials are not also necessarily fully well informed about the policies that have been passed by higher authorities, which is another crazy dynamic. We have some of the low-level officials who are in charge of enforcement of some policies, and they are sincerely not aware of some of the policies that have been passed at higher levels. So there is all kinds of information, layers of information gaps that can be filled by think tanks creating awareness to the various stakeholders at the various segments accordingly. So massive room for the such and such, information upgrade.
Yeah, and since education seems to be the key, Marina, you have been an educator for quite some time. How have you engaged with African audiences? I mean, how is it that you got involved in this topic in particular? What insights can you bring into the conversation?
Okay. Well, I did research into private schools when I was in Nigeria a few years ago. And what I found was that there was no doubt that they were better than state schools. I encountered students who had left classrooms that were 100 strong, 200 people in a classroom, which is impossible to teach. So, such people, came to our little private schools and they found them a breath of fresh air. So there's no doubt that we should be encouraging private education because it's profitable, it's sustainable, it's not paid for by the taxpayer. The teachers didn't get much remuneration, but nonetheless they make a living. But having said that, the quality of education, there's still room for improvement. And one of the things that Professor Tooley did was encourage Africans to set up teacher training programs where the teachers can actually improve their teaching skills, because it's, children can go through the system and still not be fully literate, for example, as you pointed out, still a higher literacy rate. And certainly that's true in the state sector. They just spend 7 years at school and come out knowing very little. So teacher training is vitally important, and that's already taking place. We already have teacher training programs implemented in Uganda and in Nigeria, where it began with the association I mentioned before. So that's one aspect. There's some degree of success there. The teachers who have gone through these programs on their mobile apps, they can do it at the same time as they're teaching. They don't have to take time off from work. They can work and study and earn at the same time. And this is the key aspect of it. So that's one way of improving the quality of education in your countries. the other thing, all right, just on a different point entirely, there are successes from the think tanks. I can point to entrepreneurship as being one of the most successful things you can teach young people, and this is where your think tanks, Omenira Initiative, Face of Liberty International in Nigeria, Students for Liberty across the continent, Action for Liberty and Economic Development in Uganda, they're all working to make people aware that entrepreneurship is the key to trade. You know, you have to produce products. You can't just expect to get a degree. Even if you're well qualified, you may get a degree, but the jobs aren't there. You really have to find the jobs, make the jobs yourself. And this is where entrepreneurship comes into play. So Roland has been doing excellent work introducing entrepreneurship as a concept to young people in schools to make them aware that, you know, it's not shameful to work in agriculture, that it isn't just, you know, peasant work. Agriculture can be enormously lucrative and profitable if done correctly with scientific methods, you know, technology, robotics, knowing, you know, using pesticides or natural organic methods. There's all different ways, sustainable methods that are profitable in agriculture. And you have had some amazing success stories. I gave one talk on successful African capitalists, and they were dominated by people who succeeded in the agricultural sector. One such example was Samson Agboli, who's enormously successful growing vegetables in a very modern, soilless environment. You know, he uses hydroponics and air to grow vegetables very, very successfully. But he's done more than that. Not only has he made substantial profits in this way, he now teaches young people how to follow his example. So he's aware that it's not just one person that is going to succeed. He wants to make sure that the next generation understand his methods of success and not denigrate agriculture as a source of revenue.
There is nothing better, I think, for, you know, success stories to convince people and to show them that this is possible, you know. So Eric, I know that you have been working in this think tank. What's your perspective on what youth is thinking about the future and the possibilities they have there in Africa?
Okay. So actually, looking at the youth in Africa, they are very eager about the growth of the African continent. They are concerned about growth. Unlike the older generation that are kind of control and they are exercising power over the majority of people. You can see the youth are very eager to grow the continent. So they engage in so many enterprises, but most of the systems are not supporting. The conventional systems are not actually in support of most of the things that the youth want to do on the continent. So what you are looking up to is to get youth into political position, to places of power. And you can see it has started. You can see some countries like Senegal and Burkina Faso, which are the president and the most of the leaders are young people. And as these young people are getting into position of power, and they have to give place, and they'll be able to change the systems, and that will empower most of the young people to put their ideas into practice. Because overruns on it as the older generation, that they are the older politicians, because of their benefits and because of their corrupt practices, they want the aid from the foreign countries. And through that, they can use that one to exercise power over the citizens, which has naturally helped the continent. But the young people who are coming are not interested in such silver platter gift and all that. We are more focused about enterprises, about businesses. We want freedom to trade. Yeah, we want free trade. We want to trade among ourselves. We don't want any chains again. We don't want any kind of neo-colonialism whereby the government will be relying upon foreign powers like Europe and America to dictate to us, to dictate our economic policies to us. So you can say the young generation, the younger years, they think differently from the older generation. And that's the conflict which is currently ongoing. So we hope that in the future, things will change for the better. In fact, things have started already changing on the continent. Things have already started changing. So we hope that it will continue that, and with more education, with more empowerment, with more resources to this younger generation. As I said, the older generation are not helping Africa at all. So we should rather invest more in the youth. If there's any kind of investment, if there's any kind of opportunity or resources, it must be youth-centered, must be centered on the young people. Because the young people are also the majority on the continent. Africa is one of the fastest growing youth on the continent. So investing in the youth, we are investing in the future of Africa. And these youth have good ideas. They have great ideas. They just need opportunity. They just need the resources, and the change will happen. So in fact, the future is very optimistic, and we hope that things are going to change. As it has already started. So this is the little I want to say for now. I know I'll come in later again with more facts on this.
Thank you, Eric. And well, of course, I'm gonna remind everyone that you can introduce your questions to the speakers in the Q&A box, which is down below in Zoom. In the meantime, Charles, Eric, and Marina, what are your perspectives on Africa's future? What we can expect?
Mm.
Okay, Marina, do you want to go?
No, it's okay.
Yeah, for me, I believe that the future is African. Okay, it's not just bright; it's African. Things can look disturbing, in the present. It may look not so nice, but when you look at historical timelines beyond the recent history, when you look at the vastly bigger picture, you realize that civilizations rise and fall, and there's so many things that go on in the bigger picture of history. And you look at China, everybody is talking about China being on the rise now. But when you check history, you'll find there was a time when China was really, really big and strong, when there was the Silk Route, for example, and all of that. Before, China had what looks like a relapse, and now China is on the rise again. So that comes back to the issue of the demographies, the global demographies. When you look at the global demographies, like I said earlier, the rest of the world pretty much have a declining population, and Africa's population is just rising and rising. And whatever way you want to look at it, that tells you that the future is African. There's going to be a point as we keep going in this trajectory where Africa literally dominates. And it's already happening in music. In some sectors like music, African music is the music that young people all over the world seem to listen to mostly nowadays, especially when they are clubbing. You look at sectors like football, like sports, you see African footballers are taking more and more of the top spots in those areas. And even in academics, you go around the world to universities, and Africans are excelling in academic performances across university classrooms around the world. And it just goes gradually like that, and sector by sector. You can just imagine what is going to be possible in the future. However, we have work to do to accelerate this process and to ensure that it's managed, and we are able to successfully deliver a prosperous Africa that perhaps one day would actually lead the world.
Okay, thank you, Charles. And Marina, what's your opinion on it?
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, the future is African. I mentioned that before. 25% of the world is going to be African before the end of the century. Definitely. So it has to develop, and it will develop. The question is how and how quickly. We'd like it, to see it sooner rather than later. Perhaps if we just got back to basics about the most important aspects of a free society that will help it to develop. I'm sure you're all aware of the key factors: rule of law, good laws that actually protect individual rights, free trade, you've already mentioned, property rights we've mentioned, low taxation, minimal regulations. These things that your think tanks are working on, with some degree of successes, I might add, as well. There have been successes in the field of land rights, for example. I know that ILEE in Uganda, because I also associated with Uganda, they're actually working to give women land rights, because women are vitally important, and there's a lot of evidence to show that when women are engaged in business, that the whole family prospers and children are educated and so on. And too often African traditions disempower women when they've lose husbands or lose fathers or whatever, and they may be evicted from their land, whereas ILEE is working to restore their individual rights as landowners, individual by individual, village by village. You can't change a whole nation at once, but if you just change a few people, village by village, then that's life transforming. That's really transformational to the people involved. And then when you can see small successes like that, that inspires you to keep on going, because one person, one family in one village has suddenly acquired a means of livelihood, and their children can then prosper. They can pass on their land, their business, their property to their children, and it will grow from there. So perhaps we don't always have to be so ambitious and expect to change the whole nation. Start from the bottom up and achieve small victories at a small level. And who knows where that will lead, because great change starts with individuals. It only takes a small number of people, doesn't it?
It's step by step, I would say.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I think we're almost on time. Thank you, Marina, Charles, and Eric. Would you like to do some closing remarks? I don't know if Roland is going to be able to hear us. It seems he can't. So thank you, Eric, Marina, and Charles. Your insights have been truly valuable to us and our audience. Is there a phrase or something that you would like to share with us, with the audience, a key idea for us to leave this webinar, let's say, in a positive spirit?
Okay, let me say, there was something that, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Can somebody hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Charles.
Yeah, there was something Marina, mentioned, which really struck me, and it's something that I'm very aware of, and that's the project by Samson Obole in Ogun State, Nigeria. Samson is someone I happen to know. Back in 2018, I invited Samson to Elizabeth University, where I was lecturing at the time, to speak at the TEDx event, which I was organizing at the time. The video is still on YouTube. And I've been to his farm several times. I've spent a week with him there on the farm, and it's really mind-blowing and amazing. And it's something that perhaps more of even the think tanks should, you know, in the libertarian movement should look into, even though we are somewhat specialized into promoting the ideas and are moving for policy changes. But it's definitely something that I personally am moving more and more towards. And I don't know, I would like to have further conversations with Marina, maybe after this call, on around such ideas. And let me quickly mention that at Chale Institute, we currently building a network of economic solutions clubs around schools. I think Clinton is on the call. He's been going around schools. There's also Daniel, who is not on the call right now, but we have a small team that's been going to secondary schools in Nigeria to start what we call economic solutions clubs. And we are trying to augment what the students in those schools are learning in economics, try to help them believe in their country and to help them understand the importance of trade and, you know, as a pathway to wealth creation and to lifting themselves, their family, and ultimately the country, not just beyond aid, but to full economic prosperity. So that's a major project of Chale Institute that I thought I should just mention in line with what we are discussing on the call.
Thank you, Charles. Yeah, I think the work that you have been doing in Chale Institute, Eric as well, you know, you all are important individuals to start spreading these ideas bottom up, as Marina was just saying. So thank you. It's really great the job that you're doing. Marina, Eric, is there something that you would like to add?
Okay, since you wanted individual examples, I can give you another one from Uganda, a great success story, someone called Mama Pig. And you can find her, she's got YouTube videos and so on. She's known that because she established her business initially with piggeries, but she has a very successful farm that is completely circular and self-contained in many respects. And no aspect of the farm is wasted. Everything is recycled and recirculated so that it keeps expenses low and profits high. She's managed to make a very substantial profits on just 1 acre of land. And we took a group of female business women from Entebbe to her farm in Entebbe at the time. I said I wanted to see Mama Pig, and my host said, yeah, we can do it. Well, it's no good for me. Let's take some business people. So we took a group of 10 ladies, and they were absolutely astounded by what they could do. You know, even the size of her pigs was so much greater than their pigs because she fed them properly and all the rest of it. So those kind of small enterprises are really quite inspiring for people to see. And there's lots of examples of them on social media in Nigeria and Uganda. You know, we could spread their success stories to say, you know, they've done it, you can do it too, and educate youth in that respect.
Yeah, so, exactly. And speaking about business, we've got Philip who's asking, is doing business in Africa cost effective than doing business in Europe and America? What would you say, Charles or Eric?
I think, I mean, I've not done business in Europe or America. I've done business in Africa, even as an academic. There's been phases in my life when I was a vegetable farmer, when I've done, plantain chips and things like that. And right now, I'm, also venturing again into some businesses. So I have some idea about business in Africa. But from what I have read online and my observation, even though I've not done business in Europe or America, I do think that it's actually more cost effective in Africa. I think that there's quite a whole lot of advantages to doing business in Africa, especially by Africans. But we need to attune our mindset to the peculiarities of our system, which I think a lot of us have a bit of dissonance. We have a bit of dissonance because our culture, the cultures on ground do not always fit exactly into the the economic stereotypes, so to put it. The textbooks, the economic textbooks are generally, the ideas in the textbooks are generally, and I'm not talking of free market ideas within the classical liberal framework. I'm talking what is taught in the mainstream. They are very, very not attuned to what is really going on in our cultures. And even within the classical liberal tradition, some of us, like myself, have had to do a course which is on Udemy to more or less reinterpret African proverbs and such, to show that they are in consonance with the classical liberal ideas, which is what the African Ideas of Liberty course is all about, to show people that the classical liberal ideas are not different from these, proverbs and adages that you have in our indigenous tradition. So, but then there's this dissonance, that we Africans seem to have many times, that does not allow us to know how to navigate our peculiar culture and make a success of some of the environments, the economies that we have. But then people like Marina rightly pointed out, people like Samson Ogbole and several others. I mean, Dangote just did a $20 billion refinery in Nigeria, despite all the difficulties, and Samson Ogbole currently is training 1,000 young people every 3 months. He's giving them accommodation, and he's also giving them a minimum wage monthly stipend. 1,000 youths every 3 months. He's been doing that for like 2 years now in Ogun State. And so many young people are doing fantastic things. So there is some very interesting peculiarities to a lot of our African economies that more of us need to look more closely into and explore for our own good, and yeah. I think there are challenges, obviously, and one of it is the fact that we cannot usually count on government support in Africa, whereas out there, people can always count on government support. Here, you usually need to provide your own security, your own electricity, your own, sometimes just the infrastructures, even the roads. But that comes with an advantage of it looks like being free in a way, even though you may have informal taxation and all kinds of things like that. So it's just understanding the peculiarities and tuning yourself to navigate those peculiarities. Once you're able to do that, I think it's way more cost effective, at least in the long term. And also there's low entry barrier, actually. There's a high entry barrier when you want to do formal business, the whole registration and licensing thing. But then we are largely an informal economy. And when you consider how easily you can start frying akara, in Nigeria, akara is a bean cake. You can literally just start frying by the roadside. And occasional raids that you escape from in that situation, but largely there is a very low barrier to entry into the informal economy, which is the majority of the Nigerian economy. So once you understand all of these peculiarities well, and you are willing to come down to operate at that basic level, then you discover that it's way more cost effective.
Thank you, Charles. You've really provided a great explanation of African entrepreneurship atmosphere, so to speak. So thank you for it. Yes, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so actually, what I would say is that doing business in Africa is not easy. Yes, because of the kind of environment that our politicians have created. In Africa, for instance, if you want to be a successful businessman, that is an ultra rich businessman, you need to align yourself a politician. You need to join a political party, you need to support a political party for the politicians to help you and to favor you in that. If you are not joining that political party, you'll be able to fight against you. And then you are not in that political party too. It also fight from both sides. So like most of the businesses in Africa have been politicized, and most, if you want to get to business fast track, you need to align yourself with a political party, which is actually not happening because politicians don't stay in power for long. They are just in power for some electoral term. So if you align yourself with one political party and that party is out of power, it's actually going to affect on your business. And currently, some of this is happening in Ghana and other African countries as well. And if you don't align yourself a political party, then you have to operate in the informal corner, which is also not happening. In fact, also the small business in Africa need to be formalized because formalization actually ensures growth of the business. Maybe it is informal, that means you are going to lack a lot of financial investment and all that. So by creating a system whereby there's government support for retail businesses to formalize small businesses, because most of the small businesses in Africa, they are just operating informal. They are not in the informal sector. So getting funds and the rest is actually difficult. So I think what the government needs to do is to look more into how to formalize the small business sector and stop focusing more on the big businesses and the international businesses. The government is so much focused on international businesses, is not actually supporting small businesses and mobilizing local resources. And this boils down to this foreign aid thing that we are discussing. Like the government is more focused on foreign aid and international businesses. Meanwhile, you need to also mobilize your local resources, which by supporting small businesses and investing in them, getting them access to funds and all that. But in Africa, it's not easy. Doing business, actually, you require a lot of confidence. In fact, you need a lot of confidence to believe in yourself because this system actually is tough. The system has been created in such a way that doing business will be difficult for you. And then unless you sit in the informal sector, to come to the formal sector is not easy at all. So I think in comparison, compare business in Africa to Europe is no easy. Starting a business in Africa, for instance, to start a business in Europe, I think Europe and America is far easier than in Africa. But I think it's something that we are working on so that we can push the government to focus more on startups and small businesses and to get them formalized. Through that, the government also raise funds like taxes from these small businesses. Because focusing on the big business in this international population, all that, they are coming to invest in Africa, and most of the profit will go back to their country to not stay in Africa. So I think we should be focused more on the small businesses and the startups, which will actually help the economy in Africa to grow. So this is what I have to say about the business in Africa.
Thank you, Eric. Anyway, we know for a fact that success stories are possible and that Africa has a great potential. Let's look forward to creating more of these success stories in the future. Thank you, Charles, Marina, and Eric, for your insights. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. Thank you for your time, and let's hope Africa can really prosper in the future. Thank you all.
Sure. You're welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.